It's not often that you can pinpoint a single person who has had a transformative effect on a part of the country or a community. Zita Cobb did just that. Zita was born on Fogo Island, Newfoundland and Labrador, but her family moved away to Ontario after the collapse of the cod fishery. They moved away after 8 generations of connection to that land. She ended up establishing a successful career in the tech sector, and eventually she moved back. Zita had a vision for what a resilient future could look like on Fogo Island and for communities everywhere. Today, Zita is the CEO of Shorefast, an organization that promotes economic self-determination and strategies for strengthening local economies in sustainable ways. You've probably heard of their best-known venture, the Fogo Island Inn, a wildly successful business that reinvests money back into the community. And Shorefast recently launched the Canadian Institute for Place-Based Economies. Here's our conversation. Zita, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You're in Fogo Island today?
I am indeed. It's a perfect June day out here, 17 degrees centigrade, clear skies, blue sea.
Sounds beautiful. And I will make it out there one day. It's a popular subject with my friends and I. We have to get out to Fogo Island. I was thinking that this is a great conversation that we're going to have because coincidentally, the G7 meetings are happening in Kananaskis, and they're talking about the economy at a global scale, and using all the ways that we talk about economies being good or bad. You choose to talk about economies in a different way and about prosperity in a different way. Why are you focused on the local and the power and resilience of communities?
Yeah, I think about the economy. Well, first I ask myself, and we should all ask ourselves, what is the economy for? And I think it's to make life possible and better or good, however we define that, for people. And so then we have to then ask ourselves, well, where are those people? And if we're talking about Canadian people, then they live in 4,434 incorporated communities. And so then the next question becomes, well, how can we build an economy that serves these Canadian people that we are in the places we are? And of course, I mean, that's a ground up way of thinking about the economy. And then, of course, that needs to be matched with a top down way of thinking about the economy, because we, Canada, are part of a bigger world. And I think the most important question in economic thinking and planning is, how does the part belong to the whole? How does Canada belong to the continent? How does Canada belong to the world? How does Saskatchewan belong to Canada? How does Brandon, Manitoba belong to its region, to its province, to its country? And I think when you ask that question, you see the world as being made up of parts that are all part of a whole. You tend to think about what holds them together. What are the energies? What are the flows of resources and knowledge and connections that run among and between us? And one of those really important ones is the economy, because that either holds us together or it doesn't.
So take us through, you're talking about many parts in a bigger whole. And if we start at the level of the community, and you talk about incorporated communities in Canada, why should we think about things first at the community level? And you talk about place. Maybe you can expand on what you mean by place, because place is an interesting word, but it sounds in your hands a different way to your meaning.
Well, maybe I'll come at this in two ways. First of all, we practice something called asset-based community development, which is called ABCD, but we practice ABCDE, and the E is for economy. And let me put that aside for now. If you look at the ABCD of Canada, and you're going through a process of what are Canada's assets, which I know a lot of people are doing right now. I think there's not a day that passes I don't read some other policy piece or op-ed saying we're good at this and we have this, let's get behind it. But everything that Canada has, all of our assets, are in a place, someplace. And to get them developed, and I mean developed in the most fulsome and positive sense of the word, we have to interact with places. So I think that the goal is that we invest in our assets and do it in a way that it is equals development in the places we live. So we're doing kind of sector development and place development at the same time. As opposed to, I would say, an older way of thinking about sector development, and whatever happens and is left over in the places is fine. I mean, we know we can build manufacturing plants in a place and nobody ever gets up and thinks about, well, where are the people that are going to work in these places and where are they going to live and what are they going to eat? So I think we've done too much investing in a not very holistic way without thinking about the places and the people there and what they need and what they can offer. So I would say it that way first. But the other thing, to start from, again, these pesky people that we are, what are we? We are all embodied physical creatures. We are social creatures, we need each other, and we're meaning-seeking creatures. All of that is satisfied, all those needs are met in a place. Place holds our relationships. Meaning comes from the relational world. Nature is in a place. Culture is nothing more than a human response to a place. And so I think we've been generally, in the last 50 years, suffering from a kind of place blindness. And we had that idea, I remember this because I'm of that age, I remember it. We thought for a minute there that we lived in a global village. And then we came to the realization a bit too late after we went ahead and did all these things and forgot about all the places, but that there's no such thing as a global village. We all live in villages. We're actually just human. We can only relate to a certain scale of relationships and land. And so now I think we've come back to think about home and whatever the homes are. And now I think we're ready for, let's do ground up, top down thinking and development.
So right now in Canada, we're talking a lot about big builds, and the Carney government has their Bill C5, which is meant to bring down interprovincial trade barriers, but also to invest in big projects or at least speed them up. And we're talking about major infrastructure projects and new nation building projects. We'll see how that goes. But when you hear that conversation happening at a federal and provincial level, what goes through your mind in terms of the path that we might take this time in a nation building phase?
I think it's really encouraging that we are getting out of our own way, because I think we as Canadians have a habit of being self-canceling, and so I'm happy that this kind of energy and focus has arrived, that we're going to do these things. Now we need to do the next part, which is let's activate in the places across the country that we live to intersect properly and to be able to get the most development out of the investment that we are going to make in these big scale projects. And so I know there are many different kinds of projects being planned or at least thought about. They all are going to touch a place and many places, hopefully. And the potential we have to connect into the places in a positive way, so where investment kind of catalyzes development and more economic activity that comes from that investment that is sticky in the places we are. I mean, there's little point in investing in something that may cause money to be made if the money all flies away from the places we live. That would certainly not be what is called regenerative investment. And I don't think that's what anyone in the leadership has in mind when they talk about investing in our country. I really don't think so. But we still have to do the work to come together in some kind of energy of for coordinate, at the very least coordination, maybe collaboration is too high a bar. I really believe that the zone of opportunity for Canada, for any place, is it comes from Rajan's the third pillar. He says human societies rest on three pillars: governments, markets, and communities. Where those three pillars intersect, that's where we really get good things done. So too much government, we know, is no good. Too much market is no good, and too much community is no good. So having them in this balance and in a coordinated dance together, that's where good things happen.
So if we take the example of a community that might, and often when we're talking about these major resource projects, communities that are more remote, maybe more rural. So let's say you're in a community that happens to have a big deposit of something, of some critical mineral, let's say. It seems that by design, the idea is to ship that material out of the community and to sell it somewhere else in a different market, as part of a supply chain, hopefully in North
Yes.
America or into Europe. How does it stay sticky? The benefits, and of course, just as an important sidebar, we've seen how, let's say diamond mines in Canada, older diamond mines extracted and left nothing behind for Indigenous communities that were
Exactly.
nearby. So how does the model change if through the asset-based development
I
structure?
actually quite love the mining industry because it's one of the few industries that actually understands reserve accounting. There's an awareness of how much is there and how long is it going to last. And so I would see that kind of development around a mineral of any kind in a place. What you would start with: where is it? Where are these minerals? And are there people here? And they may not be right there, but there are people, generally speaking, close by. That would be the community. And by the way, our definition of a community is the same as Rajan's definition of a community. It's every institution, every organization, every person that's in that place. So it includes local governments, it includes local businesses, it includes people and institutions and not for profits. If you're there, you're a part of that community, if you're an organization or person. And so if we are looking at, let's say, our national government has prioritized this and has found the market partners that are going to do it, then there is a three-way conversation around the how is this going to be done. And in the planning of it, the horizon needs to be long, and the money that's going to be made from taking the minerals out of the ground, which we understand is going to feed our national economy, has to have positive spin-offs in that local place. So, and too often we just focus on employment. And certainly in mining, this is the problem. Like in 20 years, those jobs are all gone. So there are many, many things that can be done. And I know there are some companies that have some good and best practices around that to say, if you think this mine's going to last 20 years, let us start now and build the next industry that's going to grow up alongside as that one tails off. And I mean, simple things like don't go hiring 20-year-olds to work in a mine that are going to be thrown out of work in 20 years and when they're only 40. So, you mean these just kind of looking at the long horizon. And for that community has economic priorities. And if they don't, they should get organized and figure out what they are, and cultural priorities. So, how can this economic activity support that and start seeding the next economy together? And I think that that's a perfect example of these three pillars coming together.
What about a community that doesn't have a connection to any of these big projects? So, and I assume in Newfoundland, Labrador, there'd be many communities that haven't fared as well as, say, Fogo Island under the amazing innovation and imagination of your company, Shorefast. But there are many other communities across Canada that are struggling. They are not well diversified, or the main industry has exited. So what is to be done about those areas?
I actually think we should do an ABCDE exercise for Canada. So the things that we've been talking about so far are, putting aside critical minerals, which seems to be critical for lots of reasons. Um, it's we are talking about infrastructure projects. I mean, I think Canada is sorely lacking connective tissue across that holds us across east to west, north to south. I mean, in some days, I think, my goodness, we built the railroad and then we thought it was done, that now we're a country. So I think we're missing the horizontal and vertical infrastructure or stickiness or connective tissue. And so I think as a part of the ABCDE process is to say, these, and the questions are, let's ask them at the Canadian level. It would actually be a really fun exercise. We could ask the kids in kindergarten, they would probably get some good answers. And the questions are, what do we have? What do we know? What do we love? What do we miss? And what can we do about it? And the industry, of course, that I know the most about, and of these 4,434 communities, I am certain that they all have assets. The question becomes, how do we enable those assets? Sometimes the assets are not enabled, are not connected to the economy because we still don't have broadband across our country. So how anyone is supposed to participate in the economy is not clear to me. We have, of the 4,334 communities, 4,434, only 500, to my calculation, have access to commercial banking. So that makes them a bunch of stranded assets. So
when you say commercial banking, you mean, I mean, presumably they would have access through internet banking, but you mean through branch? Is that what you're talking about?
I mean commercial banking. And Jennifer, what I mean by that is, yes, we can all go online and do our personal banking. The most important thing for business activity is commercial lending. And if somebody is adjudicating a loan from a great distance without knowledge of local context, they're going to find a big bag of no's. And if they manage to find themselves to a yes, the interest rate is going to be prohibitive. The biggest lender in Newfoundland and Labrador is BDC, which is the lender of last resort, with a higher interest rate than commercial banks. So I don't think our province has access to commercial lending.
So is there, I mean, I'm presuming for some of these institutions that they would think, well, there's not a market case for us to be in these small communities.
Well, now you're getting to the essence of the challenge of Canada. If we listen to the arguments made by very large regulatory monopolies around what makes a market case, we will only chase the big things. We are all going to be living in Toronto, Vancouver, maybe Montreal, maybe Halifax, maybe Calgary, maybe Edmonton. And is that the country we want? I think that opportunity for Canada is to figure out how to be masters of all scales, big, small, and everything in between. That can be done, but not in the conventional business model of the way commercial banking worked. I'm not expecting that the big banks are going to rush back into all the places they've been busily leaving for the last decade or more, because the business model of 5 people standing in the branch on Fogo Island waiting for someone to come in doesn't work. But I know they're smart, and I know there's enough imagination working with a community to figure out how can we actually do this. We got the same questions around the post offices right now. We haven't figured out how to solve for scale. And I know that market players and government players and nor community players or actors can figure this out by themselves. That's the magic of, can we please talk about how to solve this together? And so back to your question around the communities that don't have as much investment that really was development as we've had here on Fogo Island, I see the assets. What I also see is the missing critical pieces of enabling infrastructure, whether it's access to banking, commercial lending, I should say, to be more precise, whether it's access to transportation access. That's an industry that's worth thinking about all by itself, which is tourism. Whether it's access to broadband, all of these critical pieces of infrastructure, I hope, are going to be part of the national thinking around how do we become a stronger country. And for tourism, for example, Canada underperforms the OECD and the G7 constantly, despite the fact that Canada has more assets than almost any other country I can think of for tourism. Why is that? Well, tourism development needs three things. It needs you to have assets that you have figured out how to turn into products. I don't think we have the assets. We haven't put enough thought and energy into how do we make products that are world beating. Second thing it needs is access to the country and around the country. Canada has absolutely no regional air access. If you want to get to a tourism establishment in Yukon, good luck with that. If you know it's going to be expensive and very scarce flights. And so air access, you're not going to have a tourism economy without it. And then of course the third one is we have to have a strong brand. We have to create desire for people to come. And so I think we've done a good job on the branding part of Canada. I think the access part is dreadful, and we have a lot of work to do around product development. That's a perfect example of how we can invest in the country. I think our target for tourism should be 5% of GDP. At the moment, we're running at 2%, and we can't seem to get above it. And the OECD is at 4%. What a great opportunity.
I want to unpack this a little bit more because I have heard you talk about, for example, even on Fogo Island is, the lack of coordination between the ferries and the flights, and the frustration at not being able to get the bodies there that really want to go there. And I've had this experience myself. I mean, you can't get there from here. There's many places in Canada like that.
Yeah.
But are we talking about a system that's heavily subsidized, where either the state is subsidizing so that you can get to from point A to point B, or that you're expecting a private enterprise to take a cut of their profit, to sacrifice returns because this is a good thing for the country?
This is such a perfect example of the zone of opportunity where the market, governments, and communities come together. And the way I see this unfolding is once we figured out where are these assets and I mean, I think they're kind of everywhere, but let's just start with pick any place, it doesn't matter. The market is not going to fly to all the places we need them to fly. So the governments are either going to subsidize the people that are living in that place because they can't get their economy working, or they're going to invest in sharing some of the upfront, like it's backstopping really is what's needed to backstop the private operators to fly a route that, as sure as we're sitting here, will result in economic activity. So that money comes back into the public purse. So I don't see it as a subsidy. I see it as a backstop to enable economic activity, to give the operators what they need to be able to be viable for them. And the community needs to become, and this is a part of why we launched the National Institute, is to work with communities, because there are methodologies around how communities can come together to be better stewards, to get more economic momentum in their places. And if we can come together in this way, we'll end up with more as a country, not less. It's not like I'm going to take it out of my bucket and put it into your bucket. And so, you see this with air access in Canada. We went from, telling the national airline when you got to fly here, there, and everywhere, to the point we practically bankrupt them. And then we went to the other extreme of saying, well, you can do whatever you like. And if I was Air Canada, I'd want to be flying, planes from Toronto to Mumbai. I wouldn't want to be flying to Yukon or Gander or someplace like that. So, I think that's the beautiful opportunity to start to act together. We will grow our economy in more places for more people, and fewer subsidy checks and welfare checks would ever be written. That's, I think, the opportunity.
Right. So the return on investment, it's not necessarily linear, but there's still a return for the greater Canadian economy. It's that you're investing with one hand on this area, so a backstop for airlines or who bus operators, whoever, but the return is the economic prosperity that comes to the community.
Exactly. So it's like right now, I really think that Canada is much less than the sum of its parts, because we're missing these critical things. Like we have bundles of loose ends all over the place. So we're not actually getting momentum because of these missing critical gaps. And once we start to fill those gaps and get ignition, that's when our economy starts to. I mean, I watch a lot what goes on in, I mean, much smaller countries, but like the Faroe Islands, where they developed an unbelievably robust economy by deciding that, well, I think they decided they were tired of being poor and went out and issued 100-year bonds to put tunnels under the ocean for a country with many islands and only 50,000 people. That's really deeply believing in your country and investing in it. And they developed a national airline. They have an unbelievable air access. And what do you think happened? The economy blossomed. And back to tourism, trade follows tourism. It is such a rich sector, and also tourism supports culture. It's just, to me, such an obvious one for us where we're underperforming and we have an opportunity. And just in this conversation, the federal minister of transportation in their mandate doesn't have economic development. We have situations across the country where the federal government owns the airports and uses them as cash cows, including in regions that are economically challenged. Like, I don't think anybody gets up in the morning and says, let's do it that way. But in doing it, like, I think that's what we need to look at. Look at the whole picture and how these parts fit together to make a country.
So I live in Ottawa and I work part of the week in Montreal. I know you've lived in Ottawa, or you still spend some time there. It's hard for me to think about a place like Ottawa and its assets. And it might be hard for people who live in bigger centers, whether it's, Red Deer or Brandon, or I'm talking about bigger than a small place. How can you help us conceptualize what the assets might be in bigger communities?
Well, Ottawa is a good example of a community that has an abundance of assets that would be ripe for growing its economy if they were, I think, knit together in a more coherent way. And I mean, let's start with the fact we have most of the national institutions of art and culture. Like that is a remarkable asset. We have nature, like it's right there. Nature, wilderness is right there. And I mean, and maybe tourism is one that we could talk about, but it's not just tourism. I mean, my career started in Ottawa. She started in Calgary, but quickly became Ottawa around technology. So and then we have all these hospitals and we have 2 universities and we have colleges. So as a place to start to say, what do we have? What do we know? What do we love? What do we miss? What can we do about it? What are the sectors that Ottawa could excel at? And where do we need to invest and double down and come together? And we, in our institute work, and it really came from a pilot project, ask ourselves, what does it take to strengthen a community economy? And there are 4 main levers. There are many levers, but visibility is one. And I think that's one that Ottawa could probably do better at. And visibility means make visible to the people who are there, what is our economy? What are our assets? And I think we'd be surprised if we looked at Ottawa as what is the GDP of Ottawa? What's the GDI of Ottawa? Where does money come from? Who's here? And so as you go through that mapping exercise and ask, what do we have? What do we know? What do we love? Then you start to distill some coherence around what's the starting point. Access to financial capital is another one of these levers. I doubt that anyone struggles in Ottawa with access to financial capital, but I could be wrong. Capacity in the community to come together with the right mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets to steward an economy. That's an important one that I think we can improve on. And the last one is probably the most important one, and that is architectures for collaboration in the local place.
Right.
The best example of this I've ever seen is Victoria, BC, because they have something they call the South Island Prosperity Partnership, which brings together the mayor of Victoria and of the municipalities around, because the region has to operate as one ecosystem, really. And the businesses and the not-for-profits, they come together. It's a small g govern. It's not a governing table. It's a coordinating body, really. And they go through this process of stewarding their economy based on what we have, what we know. And that, I don't think Ottawa does that particularly well. So I think that's the opportunity for Ottawa
to support those loci of collaboration and connection.
Yes,
Some of
exactly.
the
For a
some of
place, and
that
it
could
can
act.
be
Sorry, go
absolutely,
ahead.
and I think more mapping around what are our assets really. Like whether I think it's Ottawa has a tyranny of assets.
Are there places that you visited that just have no idea what their assets are? That they have, you were talked about visibility, but they just don't have a
They
sense.
absolutely, that is when even when we started here on Fogo Island in 2006, there was sort of frustration in the local level around the ferry, and too many of the fish trucks are in the ferry lineup and they take up so many spots. And really all it took was talking, making visible, talking about, now hang on a second, at that time in 2006 70% of the people on the island worked in the fishery, and that's a community owned co-op. We need them to be successful. So it's just small things like that I think we all kind of did this little switch of going, okay, come on, you get on the ferry first, go, you're our economy. And so I think that if it's something we're doing together and we can set a collaborative or coordinating table that we all sit at with the same visibility to what's here, then we're going to do a better job of not being self-canceling.
So big institutions, within the federal government, the provincial government, are there some ways that let's call it low hanging fruit, that you think they could be doing, changing their ways of thinking, that could help, build those assets up, and develop those assets?
I absolutely think so. I think economic development should be in the mandate of every department, and every ministry. I think that policies should be written, because perfection is 80-20. Policies should be written 80-20. 80% of it you have to adhere to whatever that the way it's written, and the 20% can be adapted to the local place. And trusting communities to be able to figure stuff out that you can't figure out from the distance of the person writing the policy. And I think writing policy that requires communities to come together in some kind of informal, even bodies locally. I see communities in the country where things get stuck because municipal governments think that they alone are doing economic development, and they won't even talk to their businesses. And the businesses are super frustrated because they're hung up in the ways they're hung up, because they're not actually having a conversation. So it's that at every move, let's encourage each other to kind of hold hands more in the places we live. Economic development is a complicated business. Community economic development is a very complicated business. It takes all of us for it to work, and it just takes one of us to get up against it, and it's going to get stuck.
You were reminding me of a trip I took to Porto Basque in January, and what I was hearing from people that were working in economic development was that exactly what you're talking about, the lack of sort of coordination at a regional level, which had been lost with the loss of regional development, broadly speaking, in Newfoundland and Labrador, but other places as well. The federal government supports community futures organizations. Are there other bodies that you see that work quite well within? Let's talk about the federal government.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many, but I think there are like well over 200 community futures offices across the country. I think in Newfoundland we call them CDPDCs. I think that is a great network. That is a really great starting place. What I think needs to happen is they need to be knit more into the fabric of the places they are. And so there, and so, but that really comes down to the place and the leadership. And when I say leadership in a place, I mean mayors and business leaders and not-for-profit leaders. And every community, the leadership is slightly different. It can come from anywhere, but the coming together in a place, I think, is the most important thing. And the community futures offices are a part of that. That is the opportunity, is because if they're sitting there by themselves and everybody, I mean, this kind of, it's an overused word, but there's so many of them, you can't avoid using the word, which is everybody's in their own little silo with a very strong opinion about what should be done and what the other person should be doing. But we haven't actually sat down at the same table to say, okay, what is it? What are our opportunities and how can we do better at this together?
Uh, let's talk for the last bit of time that we have about workforces, because sometimes the problem is that you have great ambition and not enough people. Is this something you're hearing in your travels across the country with different communities that you're interacting with?
It's a kind of a catch-22. And where do you start to try and solve it? You can start by saying, well, let's get more people. Yes, you could. It doesn't matter where you start. It's a circle. And when we started here, in our experience, when we first started, it was like, well, the skill sets we need are actually not, some of them are here and many of them are not. And that was the work. It is, and when you start something, you know, the universe moves with you. People find you, you find people, and then you start building. And so I don't think we can wait for the skill sets to be available before we start something. And I don't think we can start something without having been planful about, okay, how exactly are we going to develop these skill sets? I mean, we opened an inn in 2013. We started figuring out who was going to work here and getting the training in place and the knowledge in place 2 years before any guest ever arrived. But that's what I mean by development. If we had just invested and built an inn, it wouldn't be the success that it is. But we took the opportunity to do development, meaning, what can we make here that can go into this inn? What are the skill sets here and the things that people can make, whether they're quilts or furniture or growing food, that can be a part of this. So let's develop as we go.
Did you rely on like local educational institutions, or do you see that as an important piece of the puzzle? Is that partnering with local colleges or
I think that
universities?
is an important part of it. When we started, we weren't able to find those partnerships in the province. So we ended up making a partnership with ITHQ in Montreal, which is a hospitality school that maybe was more ready with the level of training. I mean, as we're sitting here today, every summer we get ITHQ students that are here, and we learn from them, and they learn from us, and it's a really great relationship.
So before we close, I'm wondering what you're hopeful about. Like as if you cross the country and you meet with different community leaders, people involved in local economic development, what gives you inspiration or hope as you talk to them?
Adrienne Clarkson was asked once, what is Canada? What does it mean to be Canadian? And she said something like, it's to have a particular imaginative stance toward nature. I think Canadians, I haven't been in any communities that people don't feel this. Wherever they are, even in the most urban places, there is, underneath the surface, their heart beats a little faster for some natural place. So I think we have so much because we still hold close relationships with nature inside of our souls. I think Canadians love their communities. I think Canadians are wired to get up in the morning and think about us. I mean, I see this in action all the time. And we think about me next, but us first. And so if you are an us first country with 4,434 incorporated communities and thousands more that are not, and now we're awake. I think we weren't awake before as a country. And so something has been awakened in us. And, it's like I think we realize whatever we started building all those years ago, we're not done. We got to get back to building. And I feel an excitement about that in all the places I go.
I like that thought. Is there anything that's standing in the way of that aspiration that people have?
Just us.
Just
It's
ourselves.
just ourselves. And and I do think, and that's why I appreciate the new leadership in the country. That whether Henry Ford, whether we think we can or whether we think we can't, either way we're right.
Well, Zita Cobb, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, and I wish you all the best in your work, and look forward to collaborating with you or coordinating with you as it depends in the future. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Future Proofing Canada. Our executive producer is Cléa Desjardins. Our producer is Ricardo Montrose, and our production assistants are Elissa Coury and Blair Elliott. The show is mixed and engineered by Jackie Gallant, who also does our music. If you like what you heard and you'd like to find out more about our work at the IRPP, you can head over to irpp.org. You can subscribe to our newsletters and check out all our latest publications. And if you really, really like what you heard, leave us a review on your podcast app or share your feedback on social media. You can find us on most platforms at IRPP. For the Institute for Research on Public Policy, I'm Jennifer Ditchburn. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode of Future Proofing Canada.